breaking and entering, drunk and disorderly, law and order. A former prosecutor and a defence lawyer, not your typical pairing. And the result? Conversations about crime and punishment that are guaranteed to get you thinking.
Welcome to Justice Matters with Joe Crowley and Lizzie Green, a brand new weekly podcast. Our episodes are available on Apple Podcast, Spotify and YouTube. Check out our Instagram for clips at Justice Matters Pod. Enjoy the episode. This episode contains descriptions of violence, some discussions of suicide and sexual offences. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, Lizzie.
Hello, Joe.
How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I am well.
Excellent.
So one of our regular viewers, listeners, has asked if we discuss the case of Julian Assange. Great.
I think I would love to hear about him.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's been in the media so much you would have to have been living in a hole not to have heard that recently he was finally released after a 14-year saga, and he is now back in Australia.
Yes, I was waiting for the judge who took his eventual plea to be the final twist in the tail and not release him, but that didn't happen.
Interestingly, I'll probably get to that, but they had a scenario for what to do if that occurred. Because it was a plea deal, in which case he would get out immediately. And if the judge, because as we know, plea deals are not binding on the court. The court can do whatever they like. So, yeah, they did have a... I was fascinated by the final hearing. I'll get to this. It was in Saipan.
Yes.
The Northern Mariana Islands. And any World War II expert about the Pacific War knows that Saipan was one of the incredibly bloody battlegrounds between the Americans and the Japanese.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Anyway, we'll get to all of that, why it was there.
But yes, so I'm keen to hear the story, the saga of Assange.
Yeah. Okay, so Julian Assange, for anybody who has been living on another planet for the last decade or so, is an Australian hacker, I think he certainly used to call himself, and the editor and one of the founders of WikiLeaks.
Which I think everyone would have heard, but I guess not everybody fully understands what that was.
No, yeah. So it's a website. I assume they sort of took it from Wikipedia or something. Wiki seems to be like Mc, and McDonald's, you get McDreamy and McSteamy from Grey's Anatomy. So you put Mc on the front of something and it, I don't know, changes the meaning. So Wiki, I think, is the same. So WikiLeaks is like Wikipedia is, a site where leaked documents and videos would be put up. And he was Julian Assange, one of the founders of this back in 2006. I'll just give a brief overview. So in 2010, they do a huge dump of classified US material, which contains a particular video, which I'll talk about in a second. The US, obviously very upset by that. They were significantly embarrassed by a lot of it. Interestingly, he was charged with some charges emanating out of Sweden, and he had escaped Sweden. He was in the UK. There was extradition proceedings. He went to the Ecuadorian embassy and claimed asylum. They gave him asylum for 7 years, and they booted him out. The US brought charges. He was then fighting for the last 5 years, extradition to the US, and that's just finally been wrapped up with a plea deal with the United States, and he's now back in Australia.
Quite the journey.
Oh, unbelievable.
Yeah.
So he's a year older than me, I find it. Born in 1971. Yeah, I'm a 1972 baby, so born in Townsville again. I didn't know this. So he's a Queenslander.
I was just in Townsville.
Were you?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. So born in Townsville. His parents, he was conceived after an anti-Vietnam War rally.
Why do we need to know that?
Well, I suppose to this extent, his parents weren't together and he didn't meet his father until he was in his 20s.
Okay.
So it was, I don't know if it was a one-night stand or certainly a very short fling, which produced him. And then he went on, his mother then married a guy called Assange, and he ends up taking his father's surname was Shipton, but he takes his stepfather's name Assange, and I think he has I know he has at least a stepbrother, possibly some other siblings from his mother-later relationship. But they moved a lot, and he went to 35 different schools apparently.
That is tough.
Isn't that tough?
Yeah.
Including some homeschooling. Anyway, he loved computers. He loved, we've mentioned it before on this podcast, the Commodore 64.
The good old Commodore 64.
I know, one of the earliest computers. I remember them. He loved writing programs for his Commodore 64. and he got into hacking. I didn't even think people use that term anymore. I mean, I remember it was around in the late 80s, early 90s, hacking. There were some movies about it.
I think it's still
used. Okay.
Well, isn't it like that? You know, cybersecurity.
Yeah.
It's a big thing.
Is it? Okay.
Isn't that why people can do those?
I'm sure people still do it.
Ransom threats.
Yeah, I didn't think they call it. I don't know. I'm not.
Oh, you don't know if they call it hacking?
Yeah, hacking anymore.
I don't know.
So in 95, he's charged with 31 counts of hacking. 1995. I mean, the internet's barely in existence.
He was very busy.
He was very busy. Plea deal, pleas to like 28 of them or something.
Was that in Queensland?
Victoria. So he moved, I think, in his early teens to Melbourne, and he effectively grew up in Melbourne.
Right.
So I don't think he watches The State of Origin in Paris, Queensland. We could ask him though. So he pleads to them. Guess what his punishment is? 28 counts of hacking. Guess what he gets?
A fine?
Correct. $2,100 fine.
Because I'm thinking back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who even knew what hacking was?
I wonder if a conviction was recorded.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I didn't find that out. So he also has his first child around that time. So how old is he?
95.
Let me think about that. So he's in his mid-20s.
24.
Yeah. He's 24, first child born. He then, I think, continues hacking work or whatever. But he really comes to prominence in 2006 when he starts this WikiLeaks.
Did he have a job?
I don't
Like hacking couldn't have been his job.
Couldn't pay the bills.
No.
I don't know. Maybe it
I wonder
does.
if he was in IT.
Suppose. Well, apparently the North Koreans make all their money from hacking in Bitcoin. P.S. I hear.
Oh.
I'm not into Bitcoin
Me
because
either.
of this very reason, because I don't trust it, because I'm old-fashioned and
Or just
skeptical of all
old.
computers. Well, and just old. Apparently the North Koreans make billions of dollars hacking people's Bitcoin.
Yeah, I don't understand
Okay.
Bitcoin.
I don't know. Anyway, I don't know if Julian Assange was making money from hacking. I don't know how he supported himself. But
he kept going.
Kept going. Him and some other people start WikiLeaks in 2006. So it's this website where you can anonymously send them documents and they'll upload them.
Okay.
So Julian Assange's view was he liked science, and in science you publish the results of your research so that other people can see what you've done, and if they want, repeat your experiments and further your experiments and this kind of stuff. So his view was that journalism should be the same. You should be able to put up the raw information for the public, and they should be able to make their own decision. That was his justification behind releasing classified documents to the public.
Didn't believe in confidentiality.
No, and there's complaints later on that he endangers people's lives.
Yes, I'd heard that was part of the problem with what he'd done. Which is a big problem if it's true.
If it's true. I think the irony of it is that he's charged with breaching the Espionage Act, in part because they are upset that he might have endangered some people who are actually spies, who are actually engaging in espionage. Don't you think that was ironic?
That is a little ironic.
In 2010, I think it's 2010 or 2009, they get contacted. Now, people apparently who contact WikiLeaks, it's all anonymous. So he doesn't know who he's speaking to. Apparently he's actually communicating with Chelsea Manning, who is a US service personnel who has access to classified US material.
Is he still living in Australia?
Who?
Assange.
So Assange is apparently incredibly paranoid, and so he would move around. So WikiLeaks has started in 2006. He moves around the world constantly.
Right.
And so they don't have an office. There's no office. It's just wherever I think he or the others open their laptop and connect up to the internet, to the World Wide Web. I mean, I must say, I would not do that, because I have great faith in the Australian legal system. So I know if anything goes south, even if you're arrested in Australia, at least you know the legal system. Because I think part of the problem occurs, he's in another country when all this happens.
Yeah, subject to their...
Correct. As we've discussed in our episode on international law, he's then subject to their laws and their extradition proceedings.
Yes. Want to be careful where you get caught.
Yeah. I'd just travel around Australia and be... doing it from Thargomindah or something, and then, head on to Winton or, some of these outback towns and
Just staying in Western Queensland there.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm a Queenslander.
Yeah.
So Chelsea Manning gets in touch with WikiLeaks, says that they've got confidential. I don't know the conversation exactly, but apparently there's a course of conversations and discussing with Julian Assange providing this material. Eventually, the material is provided. Now, exactly what goes on in those conversations is relevant because the accusation is that Julian Assange encouraged Chelsea Manning to hand the documents over. In the sense it wasn't a passive
But she
person.
rang him.
Correct. I mean, this is part of the problem with the
Right.
with the US case, the United States charges against him. There's lots of problems with it. I might come to that in a second. I'll just explain what happens and then I'll explain espionage. And
Okay.
whatever the course of the conversations, Chelsea Manning provides all of the material and WikiLeaks puts it all up online. That it contains, this is 2006, so at the time the war was going on in Afghanistan, and I think is it Iraq? Anyway, certainly the war in Afghanistan is going on, and there's US diplomatic cables are released, which embarrasses the US a bit. Most embarrassing or concerning for the US was a video called Collateral Damage. Have you seen it? I don't recommend anybody watches it, but it is available for those who want to watch this kind of gruesome stuff. It is footage from a helicopter gunship, which is flying around, some city in Afghanistan maybe, I don't know, but some city that is within this area where the Americans are. It's in a state of war. And I think there was a curfew on people being out at night. So it's night vision of a group of men standing in a sort of a square in a town.
Filmed from the helicopter. And you can hear the discussions from the pilot or from the person operating the gun. And I don't know whether it's the pilot or people back at headquarters about whether he should fire or not. So he says, I've got these people. I can see them. I've got them in my targets. Should I shoot? Should I shoot? All this kind of stuff. It is, anyway, of course he does shoot. And because they told him to?
Yeah, he gets clearance to fire and fires. Utterly obliterates them.
Wow.
What you find out is the guns that they use in these gunships, they don't fire, 10 bullets a second or something. They fire 1,000 bullets like each time they pull the trigger, like just this absolute maelstrom of metal instantly, kills half the people there.
Civilians.
Okay, so who was it? Well, one of them was a Reuters journalist.
Oh.
And that's one of the reasons it was a big deal, because his death had already gone out and I think the US had already been blamed and maybe they'd said they weren't responsible or, he shouldn't have been there or whatever.
Just makes me cross that because there was a Reuters journalist there, somehow it's more of a concern than all of the other people who were also shot at that time.
I don't know if it was more of a concern, but certainly journalists
got more publicity.
Because of that. And there were civilians there. I think they were all out in breach of some kind of curfew, but I don't think that's any reason to destroy them.
No.
Utterly.
Imagine if we shot people who breached their bail curfews in Australia.
No, I know. I mean,
we'd have a lot of dead people.
We certainly would. The other thing about it is apparently these guns fire from such an enormous distance that the guys in the square could probably hear vaguely a helicopter on the horizon, but otherwise were taken completely by surprise. Another horrible bit of it is that the helicopter keeps circling and keeps watching, and one of them is still alive and crawling away.
Oh, Joe.
And they fire again.
Oh, no.
Yeah, just horrible. Collateral Damage, it's colloquially known, the video. It is horrible to watch.
Which, now that you hear that and the title is just abhorrent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that was incredibly embarrassing to the US. So all of this stuff goes up 2010, and late 2010.
Sorry, quick question.
Yes.
So you say that's embarrassing to the US. Could there have been any repercussions, like politically, between the countries because of that?
I think that, well, I mean, I'm sure there could have been. I don't think that there was.
Right.
And I don't think any charges related. So we did an episode on international criminal law, international law, and in that episode we talked about military tribunals and how people in the military who commit war crimes could be tried by their own military tribunals.
Yeah.
I don't think any of that happened. I don't think there was any comeback on the specific people involved.
Well, they were following orders.
Yeah, but I mean, as we discussed,
I
that
know,
was not a
but
defense
you can
anymore.
understand why.
Sure. One of the other troubling things about the video is that the guy operating the gun is very keen on firing it.
Right.
He's got a very itchy trigger finger, as they say.
It's just all horrible.
Yeah, and his excitement at firing and killing people, I think, is it's troubling for those of us who are not in the military and don't have to, as part of our day-to-day job,
face
thinking
that kind of
about how to kill people.
Yes. That's very complex, all of those issues.
Yes.
Yes.
So that all drops in 2010. That video just goes viral and played on the world media, embarrassing for the Americans, plus the diplomatic cables where they're saying not nice things about some of their allies and things like that. But the US don't bring any charges. So this is 2010. Coincidentally, and I'll do air quotes because Julian Assange says it's not a coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
He says it's set up by the CIA. 2 women in Stockholm, where he is living at the time, bring complaints against him for sexual assault, rape. I'll explain. So what they both women say that they agreed to have sex with him, but both of them say it was if he wore a condom. Right. One of them says that he presumably later in the evening had sex with her a second time when she was asleep or,
without a condom.
The other one says he deliberately broke the condom while they were having sex. So these aren't charges, these are complaints. I don't know, sorry.
Because that's called stealthing.
It's now an offence in Queensland, isn't it? It never used to be.
No, it's fairly new, but it followed other jurisdictions. Like I think over there.
Well, presumably it was because they commenced an investigation.
Yeah, it had been an offence for some time before we introduced it.
Yes.
Yeah, because it vitiates the consent.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether he had already left Stockholm or he's fled from Stockholm and he goes to England. He's in England and the Swedish authorities bring extradition proceedings in England because they want to question him. So there's still no charges.
Right.
It's extradition for the purpose of questioning. He says, I don't want to go because this is just all a CIA plot. And as soon as I get to Sweden, apparently Sweden had some easier extradition treaty or something with the US.
To the US.
And he was worried he'd arrive in Stockholm and they'd immediately just send him straight to the US. So he says he doesn't want to go and he fights the extradition proceedings.
In court
in Britain, in England.
The UK.
Yeah. Now that process takes a couple of years. Things move slowly in the courts, as you and I both know.
Yes.
During that time, he's allowed in the community, but he is being monitored. So he has an electronic monitor bracelet and he has a daily reporting conditions.
Wow, that's
full on, isn't it?
Yeah.
So every day he has to go to the police office, the local police station and sign in. He's living in a manor house in England because when all this comes out, he has a lot of supporters who are wealthy and famous. At this time, his biggest supporter is Jemima Khan. I don't know if
Imran Khan.
Imran Khan's first wife.
Yes.
But I think a intellectual journalist and public
and beautiful
person and incredibly beautiful. Not that that's relevant, Lizzie.
Oh, no, but I have a Jemima. So,
yes, you do too.
I'm familiar with famous Jemimas.
Jemimas, yes. So she's one of his supporters. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so he's got a number of supporters. He's living in this manor house. Now, cut to 2012, and I think it looks like he's going to lose the extradition proceedings and be extradited to Stockholm.
On the rape charges?
On these, yes, rape, sexual assault. They're not charges, complaints.
Complaints.
Because it's still just extradition for questioning.
On the other hand, those poor victims, that's a long time to wait for the wheels of justice to turn in their complaints.
It is. Well, so we'll get to what happens with those complaints later on. But what I couldn't understand is why don't the Stockholm just send some police over and interview him in the UK? I'd just say, sure, I'll be happy to be interviewed. Come over here and interview me. Answer whatever questions you like. If I was his lawyers, I would have been saying that.
But I thought you said they had no right to do that.
They can come and question you. Oh, well, I mean, they can't do it coercively. You just go and rent a room somewhere in a hotel and say, I'll sit here and answer your question. Yeah, you voluntarily do it. That's what I would have done if I was his lawyers. Maybe they did do that. But I mean, I don't know why, if it was so important to the police in Stockholm, they wouldn't just do that. It would have been cheaper. They didn't have
the budget for it.
Well, they had the budget to run extradition proceedings. So I think it looks like he's going to lose. And suddenly, after one of his daily reporting, electronic monitoring, he goes and knocks on the door at the Ecuadorian embassy and claims asylum.
Wow.
They accept his asylum claim on the basis that his human rights would be encroached on if he went to Sweden.
What, his right to liberty?
I don't know. They didn't sort of go into any detail.
Okay.
And they give him asylum.
Where?
In the embassy itself.
Okay.
So we didn't discuss this in our international law episode, but each embassy is nominally
protected.
Yeah, it's taken to be part Ecuador, but just in the middle of London.
Yes.
So
yes, if you watch any of the Bourne movies, Jason
really?
Bourne.
Does he go into embassies?
They go in one of them. They go to the embassy.
Oh wow, okay. He goes into the embassy. He gets asylum, but now he can't leave. It's like house arrest. He is in that building. As soon as he steps outside of it, he's then in British territory, and the cops can arrest him.
Did he know anybody in the Ecuadorian embassy?
My recollection is Ecuador had no extradition treaty with the United States.
So he chose carefully.
Yes. The Ecuadorians, I don't know whether they were happy about it at first. They certainly weren't later on. But the Ecuadorian ambassador got to meet a number of famous people.
Oh.
Listen to the people that visited him while he is there for the 7 years that he is living in the Ecuadorian embassy. Pamela Anderson.
For what purpose?
I don't know. I suppose he became some celebrity that you go and visit.
So funny.
Lady Gaga.
Well, but she's very much into human rights.
Is she?
Yeah. She's a big person to fight for rights, I think.
Bianca Jagger.
Oh, heavens. Yeah. Mick Jagger's daughter.
And the Reverend Jesse Jackson, just to name a few.
I don't know the Reverend Jesse Jackson.
American religious leader and politician. I think he once stood briefly for nomination for president. Anyway.
He should have a go now.
I think he's a bit old now.
Aren't they all?
Yeah. Yeah, he's probably not as old as Joe Biden. So, yeah, he was certainly somebody who had a lot of people who at least wanted to visit him, if not friends. What turned out later is that the Americans, the CIA, actually put bugs and cameras into the Ecuadorian embassy so they could watch and listen to all.
How could they do that?
Who knows? The CIA, it's like magic. I don't know. They teleport in and do things. I don't even know.
Wow.
So I know this because I heard Jeffrey Robertson QC or KC, who's a famous British, well, he's actually Australian, but he practices in England, barrister. And he represented Julian Assange for a period of time. And so all of his conferences with Julian Assange were recorded by the CIA.
Oh my goodness.
Isn't that unbelievable?
That is actually unbelievable.
Yeah. So.
And how do we know that? Did they use it?
I was at this lecture that Jeffrey Robertson gave, and he played the footage. I don't know, the footage must be publicly available now.
They must have used it in court somehow.
Yeah, they must have disclosed it. Anyway.
That's so wrong.
So he's in the Ecuadorian embassy for 7 years.
And I noticed in all the recent media reports, his wife, who was saying she was looking forward to his release. Were they married at that time, do you know? So
they got married maybe while he was in the embassy, certainly while this period. So he does 7 years in the embassy, then he does 5 years in a prison in the United Kingdom.
Yes.
Which I'll explain in a second. And during that period. So she, I think, is one of his lawyers, and then they form a relationship.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
She then obviously can't be his lawyer once they've formed a relationship.
No. Little conflict of interest.
So while he is in the embassy, WikiLeaks continues to do what it does, which is to release material. Oh, interestingly, the CIA managed to turn one of the WikiLeaks editors. So he becomes a CIA informant.
Wow.
And he's informing them Not that they needed to find out what Julian Assange is doing because they're recording it all in the Ecuadorian embassy, just in case I missed anything. They get this, one of the other guys who works for WikiLeaks is just telling them everything that's going on.
Well, he didn't want to go into some embassy for 7 years, did he?
I know. Anyway.
But there are other people still publishing.
Yeah. Well, I think Julian Assange is still helping. I mean, presumably if it's online, you can still work from the Ecuadorian embassy. Anyway, so they dump another huge cache of documents just before the 2016 US election, where it's Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. And some people say that swayed the election because they were anti-Hillary Clinton. The most damaging things about them seems to be emails that Hillary Clinton had said bagging Bernie Sanders, who was another Democrat who was standing for the nomination, the presidential nomination.
Politics.
And it is, I mean, no, you don't have to be, need classified material to know that Hillary Clinton didn't like Bernie Sanders. I mean, I've heard her interviewed. She just said it openly.
Yeah. Does that mean that Assange supported Trump?
He did support Trump because, so this is at the end of the Obama presidency. So Hillary Clinton had been I want to say
candidate.
No, she was in Obama's presidency. She was, I want to say the foreign secretary, but they don't call it that. The Secretary of State.
Oh, yes.
So presumably dealing with all of that international stuff.
Issue.
And although
So
the US hadn't charged him at this stage, but I think that Assange had been trying to get them to accept that they wouldn't charge him or something.
Right.
And he obviously wasn't getting anywhere with them. So he's I think the Mueller report, which is one of those reports that comes out of after the election when Donald Trump wins, and there's a report written about, I think, Russian interference or something, and part of that deals with the WikiLeaks. And the Mueller report comes up with material to show that Assange was hoping for a Republican victory and released this stuff in the hope of torpedoing Hillary Clinton's presidential.
Gosh, the tentacles extended far, didn't they?
I know. Anyway, whatever the case is, we all know Donald Trump won that election, surprised to everyone, I think, including Donald Trump.
Well, we're all about to be surprised again, I think.
We are. We'll have to wait and see. So, but Donald Trump doesn't help him. Donald Trump actually doubles down on the
position.
Yes, because in 2017, officials in Stockholm, the prosecutors in Stockholm, closed the file. They said they're not proceeding with it. Interestingly, because they say too much time has passed, they say that although they believe the victims and they think the victims' stories are credible, too much time has passed, and so I don't know what that means. Anyway,
the statute of limitations?
I don't know if they've got a statute. No, I don't think it was an official thing. I think they just say too much time.
Like the prospects of conviction or something, maybe?
But it's funny because, I mean, obviously in Australia, they've prosecuted stuff that's 30 years old. Where people,
we don't have limitation time-wise for indictable offences.
Yeah. So that's then not a reason to
extradite.
He doesn't leave the Ecuadorian embassy because the US then put one charge and then later 17 more on him, and they then start their extradition proceedings, but that's not till 2018. So he's already been in the embassy 5 years, and now he is fighting the US in the courts in London.
Which I imagine was probably a bit more of a battle than the sexual complaints were. Like there'd be a lot more thrown behind the extradition request from the US.
They threw a lot into it, yes. Yeah. So I'll just briefly cover what happens with the Ecuadorian embassy, then we might just talk about espionage.
Okay.
So my recollection from the time is that the US then I think there was regime change in Ecuador, so the president or whatever had changed, and was the new leadership in Ecuador was far more pro-America, and I think America had sweeten the deal with some money thrown at it or something.
Right, to refuse asylum.
Correct. Having said that, Julian Assange apparently, certainly according to the Ecuadorians, had not covered himself in glory while staying at the embassy.
Oh, gosh.
2018, they kick him out and they say, "We've ended the asylum of this spoilt brat." So that's pretty unequivocal, isn't it?
Well, but the way you describe it, he's sitting there in his room in the embassy with celebrity guests, still doing his WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
Like, what's not to love?
Well, it gets worse than that. They complain that he didn't pay for his own food or laundry. It gets worse. He didn't clean his own bathroom.
Oh, Julian.
And didn't clean up after his cat.
Well, there's reason to kick him out right there.
Absolutely.
Gosh.
So
how did he have seriously, how does he have a cat while he's
I don't know, he gets married and has kids
living there with
this whole time.
And they're all in the embassy.
I don't think they were in the embassy. No, I don't think they're living in the embassy.
That is the weirdest thing.
It is just crazy, isn't it?
Yes.
Anyway, I don't know if he's earning money. I mean, perhaps he's earning money as a sort of a freelance writer and he's writing articles and I don't know, but anyway.
Wow, okay. So it wasn't like hard time in the embassy.
Well, I mean, he can't leave.
No,
I mean, it's house
but
arrest.
that's his choice.
Well, sure.
It is his choice. He chose to go there and ask, can I stay?
Sure, he could have obviously then all gone to Stockholm and then
faced the charges and defeated them like bazillions of other accused people do.
Well, interestingly, that's what Jemima Khan says. So she's initially a supporter. Finally, she says, exactly as you had sort of pointed out, look, I appreciate he has rights, but the victims have rights. And why doesn't he go to Stockholm and just put all this, let's just get this out in the open.
Yeah, he's running away from his trial. Imagine if all accused people did that.
Yeah.
It's not tenable. And he's actually having a lovely time while he's doing it.
Yeah, I don't know about lovely time. I mean, there is footage of him being carried out by the British police. I mean, I'm not sure how I would deal with it, but I think I wouldn't want to be carried out kicking and screaming by the police. I would want to at least walk out, you know, like Charles Gordon in Khartoum, down the stairs, facing the hordes, you know.
Isn't that what he's done at the final chapter?
Sure, he does walk out and do some air punching.
Yes.
I mean, you probably wouldn't be air punching when the Ecuadorian embassy are kicking you out, calling you a sport brat, but at least walk out with your chest puffed out and let the police spear tackle you on the steps of the Ecuadorian embassy or something. I don't know. Anyway, they carry him out kicking and screaming. I don't think it's his finest performance. I wouldn't have. If I was his media advisor,
Doesn't
I would have
sound
said that's
ideal.
He's got a beard. It looks scraggly.
Yeah, I think I have vague memories of seeing the vision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like clean yourself up, put a suit on, put your tie on,
Have
walk
some
out.
pride, man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, go down with a bit of dignity. Anyway, they drag him out kicking and screaming. And because he's now a bail jumper, because he was on bail, straight off to jail.
Right.
Not to be released because they can't trust him, because they think if they release him into the community, he will then disappear again.
Well, where would he seek asylum from next?
That's right.
Yes.
So they put him in Belmarsh Prison, which is described as the worst prison in Britain.
Yes.
I just don't understand. The punishment, this is what I don't dislike about prisons. The punishment is having your liberty taken away. How is it that one prison is worse than another? Shouldn't they all just be the same? I mean, I don't think it needs to be a
all
picnic,
offenders are the same?
No, sure, but why is what you're putting all the bad people in one prison so it becomes this horrible place where, oh, jeepers. Anyway, apparently he's in maximum security too.
Yeah, I don't know if that's justified, but he's clearly a risk of absconding and they want to make sure he's locked up safe and tight.
Yeah, but I don't think you need. I mean, he's not.
Well,
I don't
he
know
can't go to like a prison farm, you know. He's got to have some secure.
Something more secure, which you could do. Medium security.
Maybe in the UK they have the extremes and not the mid.
Would be just like the UK to do something like that too. Anyway, but the other thing is he's not a fit bloke. I mean, this doesn't look like a guy who's on a treadmill. You know, he's not a guy who's, you know.
He's sitting around.
He doesn't look like
not cleaning up.
No.
Living.
He's not cleaning up after
like
his
a
cat.
spoiled brat.
Yeah. Well, that's what the Ecuadorians say. I mean, if he looks like if he took off down the street, you wouldn't be breaking a sweat to catch him.
Right.
You know. Anyway, they obviously think he's some fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so he's put in maximum security.
And to be fair, if we think about the charge where he has not the embarrassing the US, but if he has put people at risk through the things he has disclosed, we are talking about serious offending. Like that's if you're putting people's lives at risk.
I think that's what the CIA spokespeople or the US State Department spokespeople say. I don't think it ever forms part of the actual complaint against him.
Because I was going to say that would be a reflection of a serious offence.
Yeah, sure. So let's talk about espionage.
All right.
Because espionage, you hear about it, but I've never actually dealt with an espionage case.
Me either.
So espionage is effectively spying.
Okay.
I mean,
without
I suppose
unlawful
mic
spying.
drop. Yeah, I mean, everyone listening is going, yeah, obviously, Joe. I don't know that. I was like, oh, is that all
you
it is?
looked it up.
I looked it up. Case of the Queen against Lapis in Australia gives us a definition. The term espionage is generally defined as the act of monitoring the political, economic, and military secrets of another country.
Okay.
Its scope as a crime extends to communicating information that is of a prescribed kind to a foreign power.
Oh, well, that's not just like spying could be a whole lot of things. This is like
Sure.
military
Economic, or political.
revelations to another
Secrets.
country. Yeah.
Yeah, but do you see the problem? Communicating it to a foreign power. I mean, he's not communicating to a foreign power. He's just putting it online
It's communicated it to everybody.
to everybody.
So it could fall. Like, does it say it has to go specifically to them or just that they have to be informed?
Well, I don't know. I think these are the kind of arguments that lawyers would have had. The other problem is that this is under the US Espionage Act 1917, is that most people prosecuted under it are not civilians. So Chelsea Manning, who was a serving US military person,
Who provided
the information, is charged under the Espionage Act.
How did they know it was her?
I don't know. They looked at the emails.
Right. So he didn't dob her.
Julian Assange doesn't dob in Chelsea Manning. They locate her.
Okay.
But the material that was provided was available to 30,000 US military personnel. It was secret. I'm doing that in inverted commas for those not watching on YouTube.
Between those 30,000
Between all
people.
those 30,000, and the president.
What's
Just
that saying?
crew.
It's not a secret if you tell one person. It's no longer a secret.
No longer a secret, yeah. So, again, how secret was this secret? Anyway, so, I mean, I immediately think there's some problems because, are you communicating it to a foreign power? Well, you're putting it out there. But exactly what role, I mean, if you're facilitating it, they give it to you, you just publish it. You're a publisher, you're not really a...
Yeah, but you're definitely a party to...
Sure, you could be done for aiding in the commission of an offence or something.
Or even just being a joint offender. Like,
co-offender.
you don't have to have sourced the material to have provided it.
No.
Yeah. I don't think there's any problem with him facing charges if...
What?
Well, if, like, on the basis that she found it and gave it to him, I don't think that cuts him out from liability on that basis.
Okay.
Because he still published it.
Yeah, he publishes it.
Like, I don't think that's a problem.
So he says he's a journalist. I think it's generally accepted he's a journalist, just in a sort of an unconventional way. Broad journalist. He's won journalistic awards. So, I mean, in that sense, the Journalistic Association has identified
Recognised him.
Recognised him. So, and so they're, particularly in the United States where the protection of journalists is much stronger than it is in Australia, there was certainly arguments that he should...
Freedom of information.
Yeah. But there's some other problems with espionage. That is that people have been executed for espionage.
Recently?
Not recently. Sorry. Chelsea Manning gets 35 years or something.
Is
Maximum
she still
security.
in prison?
No, does 5 years, 7 years, something like that. And then Obama pardons her.
Okay.
And is released. But I think did some hard time, like in Supermax, solitary confinement.
See, that's what I mean. Like, recognition of the charge could be why he was put in Belmarsh on remand.
Yeah.
If she got sent to Supermax for that same conduct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So people have been executed. So the Rosenbergs, you'd remember that case, famous case from the 50s?
Not off the top of my head.
So a married couple, they actually had worked on, I think, the Manhattan Project. The one that the recent movie with Kieran Murphy?
I haven't seen it.
No. And the husband certainly was giving information to the Russians. The wife gets caught up in it and they decide they want to make an example of her too because they want to put pressure on him. And so they really fit the evidence to fit her up. The best evidence against her is that she types up the information for him to then send to the KGB or something.
Knowing he was going to do
Knowing
that.
he was going to do that.
Okay, so she's
Well,
a party.
Sorry, well, as that was actually doctored information.
Oh.
The best evidence that they had was that she was in the room while people gave her husband information, which he then passed on.
All right, that's different.
Anyway, they both get the death penalty. Apparently, they gave her the death penalty because they wanted to put pressure on him to give up other people, or her to give up other people. Neither of them did it. They both wouldn't
executed.
talk. Both executed.
In the 50s?
1951.
Wow. I mean, I don't know why I should be so surprised because people still get executed in the US.
I know.
In some states.
So how is this relevant? Well, it's relevant in that there's no death penalty in the UK, and so they won't, just like Australia, extradite people to a country where they face the death penalty.
Right.
So one of the arguments that Assange raises is, well, you can't extradite me to the United States because they might execute me. So the US gives an assurance that they won't execute if he's convicted.
Trump?
Well, I think they want him. I mean, they want to give him 35 years instead.
Yes.
Put him in solitary confinement.
Yeah.
You might wish he was dead after all of that. So that's his first argument. Anyway, in 2021, his second argument is that his mental state is not
sufficient.
Yeah, and that he is actually a risk of suicide if extradited.
Right.
So
which I would believe.
Yeah. Well, 7 years in the Ecuadorian embassy, and then
all the pressure and uncertainty and
and then Supermax prison for a couple of years.
Yeah.
2021, a single judge of the English courts says he shouldn't be extradited.
Okay.
That is then appealed,
of course,
by the Americans, and they succeed on appeal, and the appeal court says he should be extradited.
How are the US authorities a party to a UK matter? Okay.
I will tell you what happened in extradition cases I've done.
Yeah.
And that is that the foreign power, I mean, it's a party because it's the people seeking the extradition.
So they have permission.
They appear in court via English lawyers. So they just instruct English lawyers and the English lawyers appear for them. So if you were sitting in court, it'd be two British lawyers arguing against each other in front of a British judge.
All right.
But one set of those lawyers, their clients are the United States government.
Okay. So goes on appeal.
UK Supreme Court overturns it, says no, he has to be extradited. Media reports don't really give you clear pictures of the legal position, which all us lawyers love to try and divine from these media articles. Anyway, he isn't extradited. He comes up with another argument, and they go back to the Supreme Court and they argue that if you're a journalist in the United States and you're done on espionage charges or any other charges, you can argue your First Amendment rights, to freedom of speech.
Okay.
Now, there have been examples where non-citizens of the United States have not been able to use the US Bill of Rights because they're held to be not citizens, so the US Bill of Rights doesn't apply to them. So the argument that Assange raised is that he would be discriminated against because he was not a US citizen. And the appeal court said, okay, we want an assurance from the from the US that he will not be disadvantaged because he is not a US citizen.
So he's not going to be executed. Now he's not going to be disadvantaged.
Not going to be disadvantaged, which is totally understandable. Because he wants to argue an argument which people thought he'd win, which is that it was a freedom of speech argument.
Yes.
The Supreme Court or the appeal court, I don't know whether it was the Supreme Court or the Court of Appeal in the UK, they don't decide the matter. They adjourn it and give the US time to come back with an answer. That and the looming election puts a lot of pressure on the US to get this finalised, because they were concerned they were going to lose the extradition.
Right.
If they lost the extradition, what happens to Assange? He's released from Belmarsh prison and he's free to hang around in the UK, but he might not be able to leave the UK
because then he could still get picked up.
Unless he takes the direct flight London to Perth and gets back to Australia without crossing any other country that might arrest him, then he
is at risk.
So, but that doesn't happen. What happens then, apparently, is behind closed doors, there's lots of negotiations. Now, the Labor Party in Australia, who are the current government, they had always said that they were going to try and do whatever they could to get Julian Assange out. So there's a lot of diplomatic work behind the scenes. I mean, I think the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, said openly that they were working on it. There was certainly a coalition of politicians from both sides of the House, both Conservatives and Labor Party, who were working together to try and put to help Julian Assange get home.
Right.
Anyway, they come up with this plea deal. So the plea deal is that he pleads to one charge. It's one count of conspiring to obtain and disclose classified United States national defense documents.
Was that specially created for him?
No, it was one of the charges, one of the 18 charges that they had. But they agreed that they would drop all the others. That's the only one he'd plead guilty to that. And he had to agree that as working as a journalist, he had encouraged Chelsea Manning to provide the information because he believed the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, protected that activity, but he accepts that that is in fact wrong, and the US First Amendment didn't protect that activity. That was the facts that he agreed to.
So do you think they pushed so hard for that to get this as a precedent?
Yes, absolutely. I think they wanted
on the record.
Correct, that you can be prosecuted for this.
Yeah.
So the problem is that you can't plead guilty, or the US won't accept a plea of guilty unless you're in the court. You've got to be in a US court.
There was no way he was
going.
And
he was not going to the United States.
No.
So they picked Saipan, a small island, part of the Mariana group of islands, Northern Mariana group of islands in the Pacific, because it was the closest US court to Australia. So this US federal district court, which has two judges, a chief judge and then another judge, becomes the centre of global attention. So he flies from UK to Saipan and goes to the court to plead guilty. If you watch the footage, it's amazing. Kevin Rudd, the Australian ambassador to the US and former Prime Minister of Australia, is there with him, gets out of the car. Also there is the UK, the High Commissioner, Australian High Commissioner in London. They're both there, like massive high-powered, Australian diplomats. He's flown in a private jet.
And I was going to say, is it a beautiful island?
You know what? They didn't have a lot of footage of the island. The courthouse, I've been to a number of courthouses in Pacific nations, Nauru, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea. The Papua New Guinean court's reasonably impressive. Other ones are more...
Rudimentary,
yes, that's a nice way to put it. The one in Saipan, very impressive looking court.
I imagine it would be quite a nice location.
Yeah. Anyway, and he's sentenced in front of the chief judge, whose name is Ramona Magloma. I'm going to say that's probably mispronouncing it.
Probably.
She is the chief judge of the federal district court.
I wonder if they're very busy there.
I don't know. They do federal offences, US federal offences.
Okay.
Anyway.
Nice posting.
Well, I think they're locals. I don't think they're posted there. I think
they go on circuit.
No, I think they live there.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
A nice posting to be appointed a judge there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the plea deal goes now, and the plea deal is that the US will accept time served. So the 5 years he spends in Belmarsh prison, they will accept as his punishment for this offence he's pleading guilty to. Now the court don't have to accept that. They can jail
do what they like. Yeah.
So you asked about this at the start of the episode. The backup plan was this: they would what were they going to do? They were going to jail him. The US were then immediately going to withdraw the charge or something, and then he was going to get let out, and then they were going to let him fly back to Australia. They had this whole plan if the judge didn't.
Well, you would need it because the judge can do whatever they like.
Yeah.
I mean, they do not have to do what is recommended by the lawyers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the judge says, if this was brought before me in 2012, so just before he goes to the Ecuadorian embassy, Without the benefit of what I now know, that you have served a period of imprisonment in apparently one of the harshest facilities in the United Kingdom, I would not be so inclined to accept this plea before me. But it is now 2024. And so the judge accepted the plea deal and he was released immediately. So time served is taken as his punishment, and he's immediately released. And that's the footage. He walks out of the court, does a bit of air punching, gets back in a private jet, flies immediately to Australia.
It is like a movie plot.
It is.
Yeah.
It's incredible. We probably should do a shout out to his lawyers, particularly Jennifer Robinson, an Australian barrister. I meant to look up more about her, but she apparently has been integral in organising this plea deal.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huge undertaking.
It absolutely is. And yeah, I mean, and you know, media spotlight, you know,
and all of the potential pitfalls
Yeah.
of taking on a case like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So now he's living at home. So his wife, he married, as we've discussed, while he was during this period, and he's had 2 children. So apparently he has more children. So he has that older child who was born in the mid-90s.
Oh, yes.
He then has another child in France. He's got these 2. I think he's got another one.
Maybe
He's got a
those
few
condoms broke.
Well, according to the women in Sweden, he's not a fan of using condoms.
That's what I was referring to.
Yes.
Yes.
Anyway, now he's back in Australia. So watch this space. He's asked for some privacy so he can spend time with his family, and no doubt we will see him back in the media.
Crazy.
I know. What an amazing story.
And look, a tough road for him. I make those jokes about the embassy, but I wouldn't have wanted a day in his shoes, I can tell you.
No, absolutely not.
Thanks, Joe.
No
that
problems.
was great. Now I feel informed about Assange.
Oh, good. I'm glad you do.
Great story.
Thanks, Lizzie. Thanks for tuning into this episode. You can find links to the cases that we discussed in the description. You can also find a link to Guardian Criminal Law, and a big shout out to them for making this podcast possible.
The majority of criminal cases involve people, normal people, people like you, people like me, who find themselves in an unusual set of circumstances that would not usually occur in their life. My name is Mark Savick, and I'm here to assist you with your criminal matter. I look forward to hearing from you and being of assistance to you.
If you're interested in clips, you can look at them on Instagram and TikTok. Just search for Justice Matters Pod. See you next episode.